My husband's mother is a control freak who made our lives a living hell. So, I gave my husband an ultimatum. She went absolutely insane and got arrested for assaulting me when she found out. My husband is the ultimate mama's boy, and even 3 years into our marriage, he gossips to her about every one of our problems if we have a disagreement about the dirty dishes.
He calls her to complain about me.
If we disagree on what movie to watch, he calls her so she can convince me to go with his suggestion. However, this isn't the worst of it. He asks his mom for permission to do things. If we have a date night planned, he calls her to ask her if he can go out. Last week she told him that it was too late to go to a restaurant with me at 9 o'clock. He listened to her and canceled the reservation. She calls him at 10:30 on the every night to tell him that it's bedtime, and he religiously listens to her, even if going to bed interrupts what we're doing. I used to confront him about this, but instead of responding to me, he would call his mom and ask her to explain to me why their relationship is the way it is. The one time I convinced him to try put his foot down, he called his mom, but then came back into me 20 minutes later and started berating me for trying to manipulate and control him. I feel as if specific examples are needed to really understand how insane his mother is. When John and I were dating, we were planning a weekend getaway. We needed something romantic just for the two of us. I was excited. I imagined a cozy cabin in the mountains where we could enjoy some much-needed alone time. But before we even finalized the details, John said he needed to check with his mom first.
I laughed it off at the time.
I figured he was just being considerate. Maybe she was protective because he's her only child, I thought. But then he actually called her to ask if we could stay at the cabin. She told no. Apparently, it was way too dangerous, and her precious boy isn't used to being so far away from her. He took her word on it and told me we couldn't go. I asked him if he wanted to himself, and he shrugged. He said it didn't matter whether or not he wanted to. His mother said no, and that's all there was to it. We ended up staying in my house for the getaway as it was the only place his mother deemed safe. That was a huge red flag, and I wish I had not ignored it. Whilst we were dating, there were countless times during our dates when his mother would call him, sometimes more than once, to check in or remind him of something trivial, like taking his vitamins or avoiding certain foods. I brushed it off as quirky, thinking that once we were married, he'd set boundaries and she'd back off. But here we are, years into our marriage, and nothing has changed. Linda is just as overprotective as she was when we first started dating, if not more. Things came to a head on our anniversary. It was our third wedding anniversary, and I'd planned a romantic evening for us. Dinner at the place where we had our first date, followed by a night at a cozy little B&B just out of town. I was so excited to surprise him, but when I got home, John wasn't there. I called him and quickly realized he had forgotten our anniversary. He was out having dinner with his mom because she had a rough day and needed company. When John finally came home, I was furious. The day of our anniversary was supposed to be special. I tried to explain how much this day meant to me. I didn't want to spend our anniversary in a shouting match, but that's where we ended up. I was fed up not just with the anniversary, but everything. Anniversary, his mother's interfering, and his inability to see how it was tearing us apart. I could see him growing defensive. It felt like the same pattern repeating itself, where he'd find a way to justify her actions and leave me feeling unheard and undervalued. And after our massive fight, instead of apologizing or even trying to make things right, he did what he always does. He called his mom. I could hear him in the next room telling her all about how unreasonable I was being, how I didn't understand their relationship, and how I was blowing things out of proportion. That was it. I snapped. I walked into the room, grabbed the phone out hand, and told Linda she needed to stop messing in our marriage, and if she wanted to boss someone around, she should find her own man. His mother, Linda, of course, was ticked off. She said I was just jealous of their close relationship and that I was trying to come between them. We had a huge argument right there on the phone with John standing between us, looking like a deer caught in headlights. Linda wasn't just angry, she was vindictive. The next day, she showed up at our house unannounced. She didn't even bother knocking. She just walked in like she owned the place. She acted like nothing had happened and was there to visit us. Then at dinner she started. The way I cooked, I had spent the entire afternoon making one of John's favorite dishes, spicy chicken curry. I knew he loved it with an extra kick, and I was excited to serve it to him. As we all sat at the table, I watched Linda take her first bite. Her face immediately tightened. She put her fork down, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin as if the food had offended her. I asked her if everything was okay, and she said the food was too spicy and that I should tone down the heat. She then turned to John and told him she didn't know how he could eat anything like this and that such spicy food wasn't good for his stomach. John shifted uncomfortably his seat, clearly torn. He then offered to have us get takeout to make everyone happy, but I didn't want takeout. I had spent hours cooking and was ready to eat then. Linda said that she needed anything else to eat, saying again that my cooking was too spicy. She said she needed food fast because she didn't want to starve. She made it clear that she wasn't eating my curry. The following week, she told John to meet her at a coffee shop to spend time together after John and I had already made plans. John told her that he could meet her after his date with me, but she was persistent. She told him to bring me along, and that it had been too long since they'd spent mother-son time together. When we arrived at the coffee shop, Linda was already seated. She greeted John warmly and barely acknowledged me as I slid into the seat next to him. I could feel her eyes scanning me from head to toe. I wore a simple sundress and some sandals. As soon as we ordered, Linda leaned back in her chair and said to me, "Well, isn't that an interesting choice? Not many people would dare to wear something like that nowadays, but you don't care about standing out, do you?" I forced a smile, trying to brush off her curve, the restraining order. She lost it. Follow for part 2.